that's where you want to be in a growing team. You want to have folks that are much smarter than you, who want to be coached by you, and hopefully you have something to coach them with.
Thank you everybody for joining us for this episode 27. And our guest today is Ram Ramachandran, CEO and founder of the Router Protocol. Ram, your Twitter handle is @CryptoManRam. And I guess at some stage you were at TradFi Man Ram. I'm guessing. Because you're almost as old as me, right? I mean, you've been in this business a long time. So
Hashtag busted.
I know he's busted. 26-year-olds working with him, but he's not one of them. So so tell me, Crypto Man Ram, when did you transition from being TradFi Man Ram, and what was that transition like? How did you first get involved in the world of blockchain and crypto?
No, absolutely. First off, thank you, Ronit. Thank you, Gaurav. It's been a pleasure tracking these conversations and, finally get to be a part of it. So thank you very much for the opportunity. Always good to find an excuse to chat to you guys. We can have other people watch it while we're having fun. So yeah. I got into crypto to answer your question. When I was back in London in 2009, and this is one of those, what if I had done stories. I had a very geeky friend who was my neighbor, neck of your woods, I think, Maida Vale, that area of London. And he kept telling me, why don't you come by? I've discovered this thing called Bitcoin. I just leave my computer on and run some software, and I'm generating hundreds and thousands of these every day. And, I think it's really cool. You should come by and take a look. I never got around to actually visiting him, sadly. And then he actually made enough money. He sold around whatever he made in 2010, 2011. He made a few $1 million, and he's sipping strawberry margarita on a beach somewhere. But I sort of, that was in the back of my mind. And then sometime in 2013, 14, I was in my TradFi live as a emerging markets investor banker somewhere in Myanmar. We had this license to build a power plant outside Yangon. A 600 megawatt power plant outside Yangon was a big project, right? And then we got approached by a Chinese company who said, you know what, I'm going to give you the whole investment you need, whatever it was needed in terms of equity and debt, but I'm going to give it to you in Bitcoins. And that's when I said, oh my God, this thing is actually really valuable. People are actually using it, right? And then I did some digging around, and I Googled my inbox, and there are tons of newsletters that talk about Bitcoin, the Fred Wilson podcast and Mt. Gox. And again, there was the phase 2, as this my second interaction with Bitcoin. The third time I actually sort of jumped in was, again, as part of my various, wheeling and dealing activity that constitutes investment banking in a good way. I was doing a lot of these trades. I would get these blocks of pre-listed pre-IPO, unlisted pre-IPO shares of Uber, Alibaba, Airbnb. And I would find a market for them with, the sort of clientele out in Southeast Asia, Malaysia, Indonesia, etc., who desperately want these. I mean, these are industrialists who would have made a ton in palm oil or mines or what have you. And they would have sent their second generation to the usual schools in the West. And they would get excited about Uber and Airbnb and all that. And so there's a market there. So get these shares from my network in the Valley, pre-package them into nice structures in wherever Cayman, whatever jurisdiction makes sense, and SPV them out and bring in investors from Southeast Asia and other parts of the world. And that's when there was a beam about it. Instead of trying to push 2-3 million block of Uber or Alibaba every month or every 2 months, why don't I build a platform that could, where folks would come in and buy a $10 worth of Uber token, right? Again, now, mind you, I did not anticipate the sort of challenges this would get me into. So in fact, the first thing we did was raise a small amount of capital and build technology on Bitcoin, not even Ethereum. This is almost early days of Ethereum, right? So we composed this thing on Bitcoin where you could go in and you could bid for $10 worth of any pre-listed, unlisted stock, right? And I had a sort of a semi-closed network, And within a week, there were 300 guys who wanted to be part of this network, which is when my friend, who was a big lawyer with a big law firm in the Valley, said, you know what? There are these things called Series 7, Series 63, FINRA registration, broker-dealer licenses, and this whole alphabet soup legal complication that you should probably be aware of if you ever want to come into the US at some point. So he shut this down immediately. I'm not talking to you, right? So I actually had to shut down this platform, but voila, I mean, that was when I sort of fell down the rabbit hole, if you will, in terms of a full-time crypto career.
And from there to today, where you've helped found and run the Router protocol, we'll come back to Router in a few minutes, but can you just walk us through, before we jump into Router, a little bit more, particularly with the audience who are not crypto native and listening to this, what is a blockchain? Mm-hmm. What is crypto coin or cryptocurrency? Mm-hmm. How do they interact, and why, at a very, very high level, do we need this? Is this just not a Ponzi for, clever people like you to get rich quickly?
It's a very good question, and it's a very deep question, and I'll try doing justice to this in the
These are questions we talk about all the time, and Gaurav was grilling me before you came on, and I said, I'll do my usual. I'll ask someone else.
Take your time. Listen, this is very important for people as a cornerstone of these conversations. So don't rush.
Right. So, maybe let's start with the history of these things, right? I mean, crypto, the Nakamoto white paper came about 2008, 2009, towards the fag end of the big global financial crisis, 2008, right? And there was, there was this, what led up to the crisis was very interesting, right? You had those house loans, and you had free credit, and you had everything that's coming to a point, misalignment of incentives, you had bankers just selling everything down the pipe. And, there's a conflicts of factors, very well documented. We all know about it to varying extents. What came from that, what sort of the offshoot of that was a very strong libertarian response to all things in the economy and in terms of technology. So if you look at what's a blockchain, right? Blockchain is fundamentally an Excel sheet that you don't control, but multiple people control, and multiple people update simultaneously. And there is an incentive for good actors to actually capture value, a little bit of value, by creating a lot of value, which is maintaining that consensus and making sure that the information there is current and legitimate. And actually, legitimate is probably not the right word, current and true, right? So a blockchain is fundamentally a distributed database with an incentive for the participants to maintain a decentralized consensus in some mechanism or shape or form, right? That's the most abstract, I guess, the most broad definition of a blockchain. Why is it important? Because, and where is it relevant, where is it not relevant is probably a follow-on question as well. But let's understand why it's important, right? I mean, as we spoke about the global financial crisis, right? We found that most modern systems have some sort of intermediary risk, somebody collecting rent, or somebody as a middleman, right? You look at banking system. I mean, the US checking accounts are famous for that, right? I mean, for the pleasure of, updating, how much you give to them, even if you have a blank checking account and you just keep a few $1,000s there, you'll get it with a fee. I mean, for what joy, right? I mean, they are subsidizing their big overheads, their big data centers, their big, whatever establishment costs that they have, right? Fundamentally, they don't really, the value they add is actually almost negative in terms of, especially if you factor in the fees they charge, right? It's not really, and I'm talking about retail banking more than a lot of the core stuff that you guys are probably more involved in. So, this intermediary problem is very, very big in every sphere, right? You have, let's say, Uber, for instance, right? Again, and Uber is actually probably not a great example for why it should be decentralized, but let's nevertheless take that example, right? You have the company creating a lot of value for, admittedly, for some folks, capturing a ton of value. And by company, I mean the early employees and investors, etc. Right? And now you see a backlash of that's happening where drivers are very unhappy. Existing systems have been disrupted, and then you could have an argument about new systems disrupting existing systems, and there's a pain which is natural to the process, etc. But fundamentally, it's a centralized entity that is creating value capturing value that's disproportionate to what is creating, right? And there's no way that all parties can be happy. There's no way that riders and drivers and the company can all be happy at the same time, right? So again, why is blockchain important? Because it gives you a game theoretic framework where you can maximize, it's called the Nash equilibrium, maximize preferences and outcomes for all parties involved, right? So that's another way to look at it. So that's why blockchain is important. Probably also important to add, where is it relevant, where is it not relevant? I think, again, sort of flows into this whole hype around DAOs, right? I mean, distributed autonomous organizations, as they call them. There are things which will always be centralized, right? At least for the near foreseeable future. I mean, you don't want a decentralized army. I mean, you don't want Wagner armies running around the world taking security, right? I mean, so you'll have some things which will need to be, so on a spectrum between complete decentralization and complete centralization. I mean, some things will naturally flow towards decentralization. Some things will be centralized. Even DAOs, right? I think Maker, there's a proposal for them to set up a board of directors structure on the Maker DAO and have some people who are more aligned than others, more incentivized than others to make decisions. Because ultimately the communist principle, I mean, economists sort of, all things being equal, we all think and act and do the same things. It's not like that. I mean, all of us have different talents, different interests, different motivations, different pain points, right? So you have to run a distributed network like a DAO or something. You need folks that are really passionate about that, the subject of the DAO, motivated, incentivized, etc. So again, spooling back before I went off on the tangent, right? I think we've covered what's a blockchain, why is blockchain important, and how it might be more relevant to some contexts than to others. Not just the blockchain, but again, yeah, why can't we? I mean, this is another popular argument. It is very frustrating, especially in the early days. These days, you don't hear it so much. I love blockchains, but I hate cryptocurrencies, right? I mean, that's another farcical argument, right? I mean, again, how do you? The best way to handle that is when you need incentives, right? And ultimately, we're all tree huggers. We all love doing charity, and we all do the good thing. Ultimately, the human incentive, the invisible hand, has to be moved, has to be nudged. So that's why you need cryptocurrency, right? I mean, without a cryptocurrency, a blockchain is pretty much useless. That's why you see the whole enterprise blockchain thing meeting the goody end that it had to meet, right? So yeah.
Ronit, you're on mute.
It was going to happen sooner or later. So you talked about crypto and blockchain.
Yeah.
Tell us about your particular router protocol. What's the raison d'etre? Why does it exist? Or why do you want it to exist?
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think it's a very valid question, right? And the way that, so what you're seeing now is a profusion of blockchains, right? You have, Ethereum, you have Binance, you have Avalanche, you have Polygon, you have Solana, you have Algorand. I mean, Aurora, Near. I mean, this is open season on 11 blockchains the last 2 years. I mean, if you are...
Everyone's got a blockchain, right?
Yes. Everybody has.
How many blockchains? Google says 1,000, but I thought there was like 10,000 plus coins. You tell us, you're the expert.
No, so yeah, so there are 11 blockchains, which are the core operating systems that are trying to attract community and dApps and users and all that, right? And then there is a whole ecosystem of dApps that each of these attract, right? So you can think of, I guess the analogy would be, if you look at the universe, you have the sun, you have Alpha Centauri, all these stars, and you have the satellite systems, and then you have the other smaller moons.
So the stars are what? What are the equivalent of the stars? That's Ethereum, Bitcoin, Solana, etc., right?
Right.
And then the likes of the polygons, are they like stars? Are they planets? Or are they solar systems?
No,
They're
that's,
like
that's yeah,
I
I
guess
love
Sandeep and JD would say they're like a solar system around Ethereum being the star or something. Am I just getting carried away?
I think we'll have to come back and remap the metaverse of chains here.
No, I think, it's a good point, right? And then I love the way sort of Ronit sort of brought out, it's a leading question to bring out a very important definition, right? And it sort of tells you how much Ronit knows and how much he's letting on, right? It's dangerous there. So Polygon and Optimism and Arbitrum are unique, right? So they are sort of sister stars. I mean, there is this dual star system. It's called the myth in the Indian framework. I don't know what it's called, right? I mean, so it's like they are actually linked to closely linked to Ethereum. So the whole premise was, listen, I am London or I'm Manhattan, I'm super congested. So let me build Jersey City or Hoboken or whatever, West New York or whatever, right? And then build tunnels and ferries and all that, so that people can still sort of have a Manhattanish life, but it's not so congested, not so expensive, right? Or Milton Keynes in London, I guess. I don't know how far Milton Keynes is from London. So
Or Dubai Marina and old.
Dubai in India, I guess.
Ronit, look what you've done. You've sent
He
us
said
off
it,
on
not
a
me.
mythological
He said
quest
it,
now.
just to be clear.
Come back
Just
to the
to be
facts
clear.
and numbers. Come on.
Dr. Ram Ramani said it, not me.
Facts and numbers, guys. Come
Facts
on, we're
and
trying to
numbers.
educate people here.
There's lots of blockchains, lots of whatever. Maybe one last random comment before I let Gaurav ask questions, make it more sensible. A friend of mine said this recently, that pretty soon on Shadi.com, one of the entries will say not just IIT or whatever, it'll say Layer 1 owner, Layer 1 founder. So imagine if you were younger, Ram.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
Now, Ronit, you have to explain to everyone what Shadi.com is. Now that is on your head. You opened up this topic. Now, before we go on to the next things, you have to explain to everybody here.
To be
what
fair,
is
even
Shadi.com?
Shadi.com also has a sort of some chains involved, good ones and bad ones.
which chain does it run on? Let's get Gaurav into the conversation to ask more sensible questions.
but no, I think Ronit, Ram still has to tell us what is,
Yes, the router protocol.
Router protocol.
We haven't done that. We talked about galaxies and
tell us,
twin stars, which exist in science as well as Hindu mythology. But
this was actually, when I was after business school, I sort of went into the final rounds of McKinsey and Bain, and this is my problem, right? I could never get to the answer in a straight about manner. I would go round and round and round, and they think, all right, what, let's go.
So, you needed a router to keep you on the.
Absolutely. So let me go to the chase, right? I mean, there is a profusion of chains, and a real world analogy is, you can think of them as cities, mushrooming communities around these cities. Now, how do you connect these chains? How do you sort of make this interoperable, right? How does energy and ideas and talent and capital flow seamlessly between these chains, so that it makes sense for everybody to do that? So at its core, that's the core interoperability problem, right? And it's been there in every web cycle, Web 1, Web 2, and I can speak to this in Web 2, right? Initially, if you looked at in maybe 2000, 2001, and again, we're dating ourselves here, right? You had Linux operating systems, you had Sun Solaris, you had Microsoft, the early days of Mac, and so on and so forth. Right now, what we sort of had was, if you had a Word doc on Mac, it was a pain trying to get it to open on, let's say, Windows or any other system, right? But fast forward to 20 years, what you have is a beautiful setup where I send you a Google Doc link, and it doesn't matter if you have an iPad or a Pixel or what have you, you can open it up. I mean, the complexity of the underlying machines are sort of abstracted out to the end user, right? Another analogy, let's say you want to book a ticket, right? You go to Expedia and you say, I want to go from point A to point B, and if you're like Ronit, you'll see, I want a first class flight, and on the works, right? And
so not at all. It's all on air miles. And yeah, Gaurav's on his PJ, so what do we know?
Yeah. So what happens is, the on the back end, this aggregator is going into Galileo or whatever airline system and doing all the hard work and giving you all the nice options, right? So eventually, the vision of blockchains is, you have a ton of, you're a trader or you're a yield farm or whatever, right? Or you want to use Tornado Cash, for instance, right? So in each of these instances, right now, you're a trader, you get the best deals in Ethereum, and you get a separate set of best deals in Polygon. There's no way for you to sort of optimize across all these chains, right? Or if you're a yield farmer, same thing, right? You can't lend on one, borrow on the other. I mean, large hedge funds do that all the time, right? They borrow across country, cross geo interest rate options, etc. That's probably a very lucrative strategy, right? Or let's say you're a hacker, you've just drained, let's say some other protocol of $500 million, and you want to make away with the cash. Right now, you put Tornado Cash and it can be tracked, right? So all these good and bad use cases, now imagine them seamlessly happening across chains. What if I could trade USDC on Ethereum against USDC on Polygon, right? And there's enough bips there to make it lucrative for most folks above a decent size of the trade, right? Or what if you want to borrow on one, lend on the other? What if you could sort of do a Tornado Cash across chains, right? So there are, or cross-chain governance, right? So SushiSwap, for instance, has 15 instances across chains. Now, it's a nightmare trying to do a governance board across these chains, right? So you have a ton of use cases for cross-chain interoperability that sort of emerges, and that's where Router plays.
And that's super interesting. And just to carry that theme forward, it's super interesting when you're talking about how you're actually describing the use cases. You're actually talking about Web 2 use cases. Mm-hmm. The fun part is, right, in the instance of where this is emerging, right? Because what you're doing is you're sort of banding things together before there's a need based on Web 2 use case principles, in the sense of let me step back, not use Web 2 use case principles, Web 2 lack of provisions that made Web 2 scale faster, which is what you're doing and enabling, right? So what are the use cases away from Web 2 that you're seeing in Web 3 as the immediate fundamentals for which router protocol is being used by the people that adopt the technology? Where's that happening today? Are you seeing it in just exchanges? Are you seeing it on yield products? Are you seeing it on NFTs, transfers? Where are you seeing the Web 3? Web 2 will happen. There'll be a movement to some degree, but where are you seeing it in the Web 3 use case scenarios? That's super interesting.
So how would you define a Web 3 only use case?
I would say more on things like metaverse use cases, NFT use cases, staking, asset securitization and transfer between protocols. So what I would say is, if there are the top 5 chains, the utilization of those chains and use cases for consumer or corporate, right, which are utilizing those chains to effect either efficiency that need to communicate between communities of people that are adopting these protocols. Are you seeing any particular adoption happening? That's where I would say Web 3, if I can get away with it, than saying Web 2.
Absolutely. And I love the way you sort of double click and drive more specificity, if that's a word. But yeah, absolutely. So what all these use cases that you mentioned,
you can still reapply to McKinsey. You just said double click.
I mean, I don't know what shape the influences that we pick up from various conversations. I don't know how I got that. It's so frustrating.
Let's double click into this.
Good Lord. You're brutal. But yeah. So specifically, right, in terms of NFTs and metaverses, so any of these applications right now, what developers are using is sort of picking a chain and saying, you know what, I love this particular aspect of this chain, right? So let's say Solana. Solana has got very high TPS, transaction throughputs, right? For example, Visa or MasterCard, you're looking at 6K, 10K per second. Solana is repeatedly 100 to 200K. So scalability is a big thing, right? Now, obviously, it comes at a cost of, if you look at the blockchain trilemma, you have 3 things, right? You have scalability, security, and decentralization, right? So what gives? Obviously, when you do that, somewhere you're compromising, and decentralization and security are obviously clearly not on par with something like Ethereum, right?
And gas fees, right?
gas is very cheap. Yes, it's very, very cheap. Yeah, so obviously, I mean, if you move from Manhattan to live in Hoboken, you win some, you gain some. I mean, you lose some. And so, or from London to Dubai, I mean, or Dubai to London.
Same.
So, yeah, I'm trying to sort of.
How are you?
Yeah. So in terms of an app, if you're a developer, you're a DApp developer, right? You're sort of compromising. You're saying that, you know what, I want a specific aspect and that's best in this chain, and let me go to that chain, right? And let me focus all my efforts on that chain. And let's say you're doing an NFT play on Solana is very popular for NFTs. It used to be, right? So now why should you sort of have, so that puts you on the back foot on two things, right? One is only folks that are part of the Solana community come to you, right? You cannot reach out and attract folks in Ethereum or BSC. And mind you, these are all active networks and communities with their own energy and, you know, whatever vibe and all that, right? So one is you need interoperability for, this is one area where router is working, right? So you could be on your preferred chain, but you could talk to potential users on any chain, bring them in and then let them sort of mint and take out the NFTs, whichever chain they want to, without being subject to, for instance, the high gas fees that occasionally occurs in Ethereum, right? So it is relevant to the metaverse as well, right? I mean, gaming tokens, you could have your own in-game tokens that you might not want on a very high cost chain that might be offering you high throughput and transactions, right? So you have, and again, sometimes you have all of these, but security is suspect. Like for instance, the common knock, and I'm not saying it's the case, but one common knock against BSC and Solana, etc., are they sort of associated with very large blockchain OGs that we know of that shall not be named, right? So you have sort of accusation against these firms that a lot of purists in Brooklyn and the West Coast, they might not like that. You know, they just want the purity of Ethereum, right? But if you're a user, you don't want the high cost of Ethereum, but you want the security of Ethereum, right? So those are, if you're any DApp, any metaverse play, any NFT play, there is a strong case for interoperability, and those are indeed the type of conversations that we're having at Router, right, with various projects and developer teams.
I think we've got to be a bit careful on time because we're running over. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tread lightly with a couple of questions and see what we get back from the team at CFTE with a guillotine or not. So the first thing I want to talk about is, with router protocol, what is the difference of somebody trying to do interoperability on their own versus working with you? What's the difference in time or effort? That's to start with, right? And then what I'd love to also, as a second question, follow on from that is, what does the future look like with the number of chains out there? Do you think they're going to merge, or things like router protocol will give the freedom of people to develop independent chains that then can just be interoperable anyway? Which way is it going? Is our metaverse expanding or contracting in this essence of the number of chains that are going to be either developed from scratch, or just people are just going to utilize what Tezos, for example, or anything else out there? So those are the two questions I have. Yeah.
Let me take the second one first, because then the first one becomes very easy to answer.
Yeah,
the second one is exactly like the universe, right? I mean, you have stars becoming dwarfs, dwarf becoming white dwarf. You know, you have the so you'll have what you're going to see is interoperability is going to be a big piece of, like, if you look at what Polygon is doing, right? They have a lot of native cross-chain capability already built in, right? And as an evolving protocol, you have a complex problem of running a layer one, but increasingly the smart ones are getting ahead of the curve and building in elements of interoperability in that overall piece, right? And then you have projects like Router, a bunch of us sort of approaching that from a core interoperability communication, cross-chain communication perspective. And, you know, arguably the direction for us also is to sort of move to our own blockchain. It sort of fits into all of the blockchains, and it takes care of the data, the messaging layer, the interoperability layer of it, right? So you could have either the blockchains moving in that direction, you could have the protocols, projects moving in that direction, but ultimately it's about building those capabilities that let you drive messaging across blockchains and making it more seamless, right? So now so that's why the universe analogy, right? It's always expanding, chaotic, black holes eating each other, whatever, right? I mean, all those sort of. Now, having said that, your first question is very easy to answer. It's a pretty complicated endeavor. I mean, a project, I mean, if you're a large project, I think Compound is trying to do something here. I mean, you could potentially have a sort of attention bandwidth focused on building your own interoperability suite, if you will. But do you really want to do that? I mean, you have a core business, which is whatever you're building, a lending platform or whatever. And then if it makes, in the case of layer ones, arguably it's a question of survival. It's just the cutting edge of what keeps them relevant. But if you're a standard dApp, I mean, you have no business to be building your own interoperability suite unless it's a very specific use case you're trying to solve, because it's a complex problem. I mean, look at our space, right? Every major player in the space has been hacked, right? In fact, you look at Thorchain, you can look at Wormhole, you look at some of these bigger, it's a question of when rather than if, right? And then there's so many variables that can go wrong from a security perspective. And that's what keeps us awake. It's crazy. I mean, the number of audits we've gone through, the number of white hat hackers we have on our payroll that is like flagging things and we just jump on it. So it's a complex problem. So I don't, that's why most folks don't get into it. And yeah, sorry. Yeah. So, and in terms of the number of blockchains, you could have a long tail of, the Linux variations. You have a lot of Linux variants, right? So you could have a long tail, but I guess a lot of the ecosystem will be centered around a core group of blockchains. That's my sense.
Thanks a lot for that, Ram. Ronit, I don't know how we're doing to either extend or do we have to call it quits and bring Ram back on?
You can maybe ask another question or two, Gaurav.
Okay. Yeah. So right now, yeah, thanks. Ram, looking at where you are today, tell us how many protocols are interoperable using you today, and how many are you going to expand to, and at what pace are you expanding this as a service or an offering, or from you to for consumption? What does it look like today?
Yeah, so we launched our alpha Q1, early Q1, and things really took off early June. So between early June and late July now, in 2 months, have crossed maybe almost 300 million transactions across chains. We cover around 10 chains, all the major EVM chains, right? Polygon, Avalanche, Ethereum, Harmony, Phantom, sort of, in fact, yeah, this is blanking out in terms of all the chains we cover. Our big focus will be covering non-EVM chains and also fundamentally re-architecting the base protocol, right? In terms of some more enhancements we need to go cross-chain. We were actually about to go live on Terra. We had built a solution that would let you put in your money on any chain and it would automatically get deposited to Anchor on Terra. And remember, this was a very, very hot thing even in quite recent history, right? But unfortunately, because of what happened to Terra, we sort of rolled back on that. But other non-EVM chains are a big focus, especially on the Cosmos Tendermint consensus, and we'll roll that out in the next couple of quarters. But pretty impressed with the user growth. We've crossed 300 million in trades. We've almost 10,000 users. Almost 1,000 daily active users. So it's been good traction so far.
And looking at this space, which is so new, something that's definitely going to be an issue for growth for you is, I imagine, developers, right, with knowledge across protocols to work on this, because every time a new protocol comes up, effectively you need somebody who either knows it, or somebody has to be trained in it, or someone has to build experience on it, right? So only as good as the experience you have to translate it, to bring it as an offering on board, right?
Yeah.
Today you are, on the major platforms, the major chains is essentially active.
Yeah.
How many more have you got enabled in the next 6 months? And what do you think you can do as a founder to do this, face the challenge of, having your own resources, because you have to continue being the bedrock of expertise so that other people don't have to be, right?
Right.
It'd be interesting to see how you're navigating that path to people experience and then offering it back out.
Got it. So if I listen to you, if I hear you right, you're asking about two things. One is near-term roadmap in terms of change, and the second one is about team growth and how
challenge of as soon as a new star is born, you're like, oh my god, what's the gas, what's the mass, what's the brightness. It's just like, you have to go and tell that to everybody else. You have to be the Wikipedia effectively of the metaverse, right? So it's a big, how do you navigate that? So yes, there are two questions embedded there.
In terms of change, I mean, the EVM chains are all covered. We can actually pretty much very quickly ram them on board. I mean, it's a function of how much traction the chain has and how much support the chain wants to give us in terms of onboarding, initial liquidity programs and incentives and all that. And, yeah, literally, those are the two questions. I mean, all EVM chains we can roll out. If we do a sprint, we could roll out every single EVM chain out there in 2 weeks. Right? If you want to do that but the second question is very, very important, right? I mean, how do you grow the team? How do you make sure? So I'm just, honestly, there's a big, misconception. I'm probably the dumbest guy in my team, and that's a good thing. I'm happy about it, right? I mean, you want 20 somethings who are, buzzing with ideas, who can dive into GitHub and look, I could read a code for half a day and they would just in 2 minutes figure out what it is about. Right? I mean, it's just so long since I coded. I'm a product guy, hiring, strategy, talent, making sure the overall product direction. So that's where you want to be in a growing team. You want to have folks that are much smarter than you, who want to be coached by you, and hopefully you have something to coach them with, right? I think one point I'd like to add is, we have one of the sharpest dev teams globally, bar none. And I say that because it's organically grown, right? Because we've been in crypto since 2015-16, right? So I hired a young developer then, Shubham. So he's now my CTO, and he brought in a couple of guys, and they brought in a couple of guys. And now we have this interesting system where we have a sort of a hacker house in Bangalore, we have sort of a hacker house in Delhi, we have a hacker house in Dubai, hopefully other places. And these developers just converge there, and they just live and work and just do their magic. And it's a very, and you can only do that with young folks. You can't do that with slightly older folks. So, and you can do certain things, but the overall hacker house experience is very much late teens, early 20s, depending on what have you. So that's increasingly a trend you'll see with a lot of these teams. They have a lot of distributed locations across everywhere, with a lot of hacker house style aggregation points for developers to come in and work and it's a loose relationship. It's not like a standard. You have all these. That's the other thing between Web3 and Web2. Web2 job offers, contracts, lawsuits. Web3 it's just they love you, you love them, you guys are together. The moment there is slight friction as a founder, you have to run and make sure they're happy. If you think that it's a relationship worth pursuing, otherwise, boom, there's so many offers. The best guys can go to any protocol and earn millions of dollars, right? So that's the thing that keeps.
Well, I'm happy to hear that things are changing, but I hope they stay as energetic and enthusiastic without falling to any traditional ecosystem negativities, as you say, with what you're doing with hacker houses. Super interesting. Thank you so much, Ram. I'm going to hand back to Ronit on that. It's been a pleasure.
Maybe just to wrap up the whole conversation, Ram, maybe on a personal note, you, if you don't mind me sharing this, you're zooming in from Dubai. You've in the past been based in India, in Delhi, and in Singapore and other places. Do you see yourself now being in Dubai? Why Dubai? What does Router look like in 3 years' time? I usually say 5-7 years, but this space is so fast moving. Let's just say 3 years' time. What do you and Router look like in 3 years' time? I'll be visiting you on the Palm in your massive penthouse, or what's the story there?
I mean, that's the other thing, right? I mean, as you grow older, you realize, I mean, and I think the wisest man out there, one of the Vitalik, right? I mean, you want to be as disattached as possible. I mean, all these things weigh you down. I mean, whatever you have, I mean, a car, a house. I mean, you want to be nimble, light, asset light, as they call it in finance, right? I mean, you want to have the ability to sort of move from, and I think CZ Binance set the template, right? I mean, you can seamlessly flip, given the nature of our space, right? I mean, we're always going to get into running battles with regulators. So you want to be in a position where you can just pack up and move like a safe house that the CIA has from any location to any location globally, right? And hopefully there's enough incentives to play these jurisdictions across each other so that we'll always have as a crypto company. But the snark apart, I think Dubai is a great location. As I tell my friends, Dubai and Singapore are the two best Indian cities, right? I mean, you have a very good lifestyle. You have So it's lovely. There's this crypto friendliness, there's a crypto eagerness, right? I mean, everybody from the top of the government. I mean, I actually think if the golden age of the Islamic civilization with the Abbasid caliphs between the 8th and the 12th century, what they did with Baghdad, right? I mean, a lot of modern technology and science, etc., sort of came up. So Dubai is sort of in a mini. In a nice way, they have a thirst for knowledge, right? They want to get the sharpest folks in from not just crypto, from everywhere, and they want to provide a conducive environment. And Singapore used to be that, but I don't think they are anymore. There's a lot of crackdown on crypto. There's a lot of distrust, and and I think Dubai is a great place. If you are a crypto founder or a developer, whatever, I think Dubai is one of the places that should be on your short list.
Awesome. Well, Gaurav and I look forward to hanging out with you in Dubai, watching Router Protocol grow and being part of this DeFi Web3 golden age, with Dubai as one of the capitals, one of the stars in the galaxy or the universe that is going to be Web3. So thanks so much for joining us, Ram. It's been a pleasure to have you here today with us.
My pleasure. Thank you, Ronit. Thank you, Gaurav. Speak to you guys soon.
Absolutely.